sense of seeing my whole life before me.
Excellent, excellent. I just want to thank everybody who's joining us right now. It does say that we are running live now, so I think that's pretty exciting. And I'm just going to click on my little YouTube screen here, just see that it actually does look like it's coming up live. I think it will. Yeah, so all right, let's close that down, and we'll just see how things are going. I think we've got a chat as well. So those who want to chat, that's totally fine. I'm Bob Wells, Mayor of Courtenay and business owner here in the Comox Valley. And yeah, we've been having a lot of excitement over the last couple of weeks. I think it's February 13th is about when the first announcement started coming out in terms of preparing for the coronavirus. Personally, at that point, I prepared my staff both at my company and at the city for kind of, closing down. We didn't know how things were going to go. Oh, hang on one second. I should probably mute my phone too. How's that sound?
It's your show, Bob. It's a fun.
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, I mean, yeah, so it's been a really exciting time, I think, and I've been keeping in contact as much as I can with the local leaders, with leaders across the province and our area. In fact, I just spent about an hour today talking to the mayor of Charlottetown, who just called me out of the blue and said, "Hey, we always have great chats at our conferences and stuff." So, and he just had a few questions, and an hour later, and just seeing how we're all kind of the same. But I really want to thank John for joining me today. John, I'll let you introduce yourself and yeah.
Oh, yeah. So my name is John Allen Jack. I'm a member of council for the Hoo-ay-aht First Nations, which is on the west coast of Vancouver Island. And I'm also the First Nations director on the Alberni-Clayoquot Regional District. We've been members of the regional district since about 2012, and I've been the chair of the regional district since December of 2016. So it's been a ride. I have a great group of people around me. So.
Excellent. Yeah. And I've been on the regional district for about 6 years. I actually just stepped down back in November. And what can you tell me how that difference is, versus, the regional district versus the First Nations, or if there is a difference at all?
There's a definite difference between my experience as a member of council with my experience as a director on the regional district, and definitely as the chair. So it's actually, I find that First Nations occupy some distance between, or some territory between, a municipality and an electoral area when it comes to being a part of a regional district. So it's a lot like a municipality insofar as we have our own elections, we have our own jurisdictions and laws and boundaries and all of these things. And so I was appointed as a member of council to represent the regional district. So that's quite a bit like a municipality. We're quite a bit like a regional district or a electoral area in a regional district because of our often remote or rural nature, but also our population levels tend to be more like that rather than like a municipality when it comes to densities and the kind of form and function of a given community. So it's not common for First Nations to ever really be a part of a regional district. It's mostly as a result of a modern treaty. I think Seychelles might actually be one of the exceptions to that particular comment, but in that, treaty nations are the ones that tend to have joined regional districts as a result of a modern treaty. So it's kind of why I'm there, I suppose.
Excellent. And I know, when I first got onto the regional district, one of the issues that we had, talking about crisis management, we were right in the middle of about a 46-day boil water notice. And not a lot of people wanted to be chair of the water committee at the time. And I had never been on the regional district. I had no idea. One of the directors, Edwin Grieve, put my name forward, and I had put another director's name for it. And, then you have to have this, it's not really a dance off, but you have to have a speech ready to about why you should be given consideration to be the chair of the water committee. And I was woefully unprepared and basically just said, well, I nominated the other guy, but if you think I'll do a good job, I'll work my butt off for you guys. And then that was it. Kind of worked out well. And one of the first things I did as chair of the water committee is actually call a meeting with our local Comox First Nation to basically sit down. And we had no idea really what was going to unfold over the following years, but it seemed important to sit down and say, here we have this huge issue in our community, and we want to make sure that you guys are part of whatever decision-making process, the discussions that we're having, so that we can get that sort of bigger picture that's kind of you wouldn't necessarily get otherwise. And we were actually able to eventually provide an actual seat at the table, non-voting observer status, but at least we could get that input sort of real time on the various things that we'd be discussing. And so I think, as you said, I mean, each regional district, each First Nation, it can be, well, I mean, really the regional districts are designed to fill a need locally. So they kind of develop on their own, and you don't necessarily even have two regional districts that are the same. So, and so, being from the city of Courtenay, I think one of the things that I found at the regional district is we are kind of that larger municipality. We have more members, we have more votes, and so that creates its own dynamic, I think, once you're there, whether you're on sewer, water, transit, I mean, any number of the different committees and commissions. So yeah, it's kind of interesting. So what got you interested in politics in the first place?
Well, I like a lot of things. I think I've kind of lurched into it. So I was a snot-nosed college kid. I think I was in the end of my third year at Vancouver Island University, and I was doing global studies, so mostly politics, history, economics, geography, so on and so forth. And it was about that 2004 or 5 when my nation was going through the early stages of treaty negotiation. So the modern treaty that makes us a part of the regional district was also something that was still being negotiated back then. And I am a citizen of the nation. And so what we did when the creation of our community constitution, which was one of the stipulations of having a modern treaty, we had to have a community constitution, adopt the rule of law. We had to have a fundamentally democratic government. And so it was the development of the Constitution was kind of seen as the first test to see whether or not treaty would take in our community. Because in the late 90s or early 2000s, all of New Channel's territory, all 14 nations within the New Channel Tribal Council, basically the Midwest coast. So except for the bottom tip and the top tip, the whole West Coast is New Channel's. Formerly called the Nootka in really old textbooks, so that might be relevant, but only 6 nations actually accepted the agreement in principle, which is the stage before final negotiations. And so the 5 nations came together as mono, then another one continued on in an incremental treaty. So I missed all of that. I grew up outside of my territory. I grew up in the place that I live now, Parksville. And I lived a fairly introverted and insular life. It was get up, go to work, or get up, go to school, or both. And so when I got something in the mail about the development of my community constitution and what was going on with treaty, I kind of knew what was going on, but it really took me to use some of my professor's office hours at VIU to kind of go, okay, well, what do you think of this? And he got really excited. And he wasn't the type of guy to get really excited. He was that kind of old school professor. And he says, you should pay attention to this and see what's going on. And then later I get another thing. It's sitting on my desk in my room, and It's actually a 80 questionnaire about the type of government and the type of relationship Hut'it citizens should have with its people, and how the structure should be arranged, what's our relationship to the land, and so on and so forth. And normally what they do is they conduct those questionnaires in person and fill them out for you. But for whatever reason, it was left behind, knowing that I could just write it out. And I think it was like, I think I emailed saying, if I'm not there, just leave it. I'll fill it out and send it back. Well, that semester I had just concluded I think it was a social research methods second year course or something like that. So not only did I answer the questionnaire, I actually got out the red pen and rewrote about 30% of the questions, going, well, this is a leading question, so you should write it like this. And do you really want to word it this way? And this is a misspelling. And I fill it out and forget about it. But 2 months later, I get a call from the person who is conducting the questionnaires, but is also the administrative help for the Constitution Committee of the Hut'it First Nations. So my tribe's Constitution Committee, the ones who are basically in charge of developing our Constitution. And they ask, well, okay, we've noted your questions or your answers, but we're more interested in the fact that you rewrote a lot of these questions. We were wondering if you'd like to be a youth member on our Constitution Committee. And then I said yes. I think mostly because they were offering $150 per meeting or something like that. And then I became hooked completely on everything that was going on. The moment I had a sense of what was happening in my community, I knew that this was turning a corner for my tribe, turning a corner for relationships between First Nations and the Crown, and potentially turning a corner for the individual destinies of our people. So all of that taken together, I was brought on other committees, governance and finance, and I ended up working as a staffer up until about 2009, and that was the first time I ran for a seat on the council. And I squeaked in by like 7 or 8 votes. And then from there, I became a politician, and I continue to be. So those first 2 years were under the Indian Act. And then on April 1st, 2011, our treaty became effective because we had gone through a process of finalizing negotiation and finalizing the Constitution for our community. The Constitution passes with over 90% approval. And then in the ratification period was about 6 months of insanity of doing everything, 60, 70-hour weeks, and just making it happen. I was a part of a communications team of about 13 people, and that was a good 40% of our total staff at the time, which was unheard of. But we got, I think, just a hair over 90% approval on the treaty, and the rest was history. So on April 1st, 2011, which is not the best day to pick, April Fool's Day, but still, it was great because that on the midnight, the day before April 1st, our community got together because we needed to fill the vacuum that would be left behind by the Indian Act. And so ceremoniously, there was a fire started right outside of our hall, like right on the gravel right in front of the steps. And people would take a page of the Indian Act and burn it before they came inside. And that was amazing. But then we started sitting as a council, passing all of the legislation that was going to kind of fill the vacuum left behind by the Indian Act. And you can see those today on our website. It's pretty cool that you can see our growing history and all of the decisions we've made leading up to today. And part of that is creating new opportunities for relationships. That's one of the first lessons that we learned, was that now that we are no longer under the Indian Act, creating relationships between other communities, other nations, with businesses, and the Crown, again, is going to be one of the central and most important things that we do as a community, because we negotiated a treaty. And that serves as an impetus to create those new relationships in a more positive way. So the relationship between First Nations and the Crown governments, especially the federal government, is often troubled at best. And so having that treaty really gave us kind of not a do-over, but a second chance, and the ability to kind of really create a new relationship, something that the BC provincial government at the time was really hoping to create. I think it was Gordon Campbell then. And we were successful at doing that, I think, and still continue to be. And the creation of good and constructive relationships has been and continues to be one of the central aspects of why, at least I feel, Huu-ay-aht has been very successful at achieving its aims in various ways. And I credit those initial positive experiences we've had with local government and local leaders as being one of those first few things, because very often the relationship between local government and First Nations is either non-existent or troubled, but troubled because there's this barrier, invisible barrier of law and jurisdiction between the two. And whenever a local government tries to speak to an Indian nation, the province goes, well, wait, that's us. So then you play telephone game between how many people, right? So the advent of treaty has really made that better. And I have had the opportunity to kind of see all of the great work that's been going on in the Comox Valley in regards to preparing for treaty, creating that new relationship, even before the effective date of that treaty. And that's, if I could go back, that would be one of the first things I do is do all of that kind of work, because then you're hitting the ground running on one of the most important aspects of that relationship building. And like going back to where I came from in the politics, this is what excites me, is that perspective for positive change with the application of work is just addictive. And that's what keeps getting me up every day, is that if we keep pushing, lives will get better. And very few leaders get the opportunity to really see that and do that to the same degree that we are. We're moving so quickly and we're making mistakes according to how quickly we're moving, but we can see the improvement in our situation collectively, and I think individually between people quite a bit. And it's something that allows us to come together as a community and feel secure enough that we can actually have secure relationships where our innate difference as a First Nation isn't the first thing that comes up, right? Like, and that's important for me, because we're at the table, we're already equal. We don't need to continue to remind people of that fact, because we are, and we're there, and we're contributing in real ways that hopefully create value, however defined. And so I could go on and on. I mean, it's that political process of not only becoming a treaty First Nation, a self-governing First Nation with our own resources, our own land, our own destiny is under our control, is kind of countered with the fact that we don't have anyone to blame anymore. But I don't think we really had anyone to blame for the first place. And but it's making the conversations that we have internal to Huu-ay-aht astonishingly similar to the conversations that are had around any municipal or regional district table, in addition to any provincial or even federal table. And so that self-governing status allows for us to really get to a point where we realize we have a lot in common with the people around us, regardless of what their legal or political or ethnic status may be. The conversations you have with your table will be probably somewhat similar to the conversations that we have, maybe with some of the details different, right? It's interesting. It's also something that I see as a way to create commonality across the island, at the very least.
Yeah. Well, I've been relatively political since I was a kid. Probably around the age of 15 is when I first really started looking around the world, and things were happening in East Berlin, in China, and then became aware of what was happening in South Africa. And for me, through various organizations. You could write a letter and it'd get mailed off, and you sort of asking governments to do something, and it felt good to know what was going on, but the letters didn't really make me feel like I was necessarily being as effective as possible. And I really wanted to be part of it in some way. And I had met someone from South Africa in high school, and I was like, oh, I'm kind of planning on going to South Africa as soon as I graduate. And lo and behold, I graduated, and within a month I was on a plane going to South Africa back in 1991. In my mind, I was going to be going and fighting apartheid. Nelson Mandela, between the time I decided to go and I got there, had been released from prison, but apartheid in of itself was still there. And one of the things that I found really interesting, and sort of going to the history of Canada and even the Indian Act, is the system of apartheid came about when the South African government came to Canada back in like the 20s, and sort of said, okay, how are you guys dealing with your Indigenous folks? I don't think they use that term necessarily, but South Africa literally built the apartheid system based on what was happening in Canada, and that's not something to be proud of by any stretch of the imagination. But when I went there, it was great to meet with folks that were potentially more progressive, and sometimes not so much. And I'd be very clear that I'm a Canadian. We have our own issues for sure, but from my perspective, every person should have the right to vote. And I did not understand at all how complicated the Indian Act or reservation systems were in Canada. But it was a great year that I had there. I got to stay with several families, lawyers, and doctors, and just getting, I think, a very progressive but really unique view of what was happening there. And then, of course, when they actually had the referendum to abolish apartheid, to be there and to see how people were celebrating in the streets when obviously apartheid was overturned, and it was just again a highlight of my life. And when I got back to Canada, some people are like, oh, you should kind of be involved, and I was sort of seen as now this political guy, I guess, and I was said, I'd owned my own business before when I was in high school, and I was like, I'm interested in doing some business stuff, and I'm into theater, and I want to continue doing the stuff in theater. So I said, I'll help out with the student union and stuff if you want, and then went off to a conference somewhere, came back, and was just told, oh, by the way, you're the president of the student union now. And I was like, okay, sure, if that's the way it's going to be. But I was very clear that, I'm not a guy who likes to wear a tie all the time. I'm really about looking at the outcomes. And I just like to get stuff done. But more importantly, I want to have fun while I'm doing it. And my goal is that, when I'm working with people, that, building good relationships, and kind of, I think, looking beyond the problem, because we may not fix whatever the problem is, or we may have to compromise, but another issue is going to come up right after that. And then when I was 19, so I was old by this point, the mayor of Salmon Arm and a couple of the councillors asked me to run for city council. They saw what I was doing for youth in the community, and so I ran for city council. Youngest person, I think, in BC that year. I think you had to be 18 or 19 to run, and it was fantastic. It was a great experience. I came in dead last. Couldn't have done any worse. But it was a great experience. And then afterwards, the council and various committees, the Chamber of Commerce, Rotary clubs, they started asking me to be part of committees and starting to work on different projects in the community. And so even though I wasn't elected, I really felt like I had that vested interest. And I did get very involved sort of at provincial and federal politics. But at some point, I just found that partisan kind of rhetoric, again, it wasn't about getting stuff done necessarily. It was about kind of poking holes at the other guy for whatever reason. And so I got out of politics and I said, you know what, I'm done. And it wasn't until I moved to Courtenay here, again, had no desire to do anything with politics or computers. And then in 2014, I was approached by a few people who said, look, you know, we have this issue with our homeless folks. They're staying at Maple Pool, and you know there's some movement to try to evict these people because they're staying in substandard housing. I mean, it was trailers and that kind of stuff. Mm-hmm. But it was, you know, better than sleeping under the bridge or in a park somewhere. And so I ran and I said, you know, to me, this is a bit of a singular issue. I think I'm good at other stuff. And, you know, luckily I got elected. And, you know, not only did we deal with Maple Pool and making sure that the housing there was, you know, up to standard and that it was looked after, but also at the regional district, we're able to create funding for our homelessness coalition. And, you know, those kinds of things that I just never would have thought were possible. And then beyond that, you know, being chair of the water committee, creating partnerships with the Comox First Nation, if I had a wish list, I mean, none of that stuff would have been on there because I wouldn't even have thought it was possible, you know. And so yeah, I've been into the last election. It was a few people asking me to run for mayor, and I'd sort of said, you know, I feel like I got a lot done. I don't know if I need to be mayor, but if I'm going to be mayor, this is what I'm going to do. And to me, a big part of it was culture. You know, dealing with the culture at City Hall, dealing with culture at the regional district, which I didn't think was necessarily bad. And I thought staff were really getting things done, but really trying to get to the root of why people are frustrated with, well, government in general. Yeah. And that's been one of the really cool things, you know, since the election, working with staff, working with the Construction Association, so they can come in and we have these sort of roundtable discussions where they can talk about what their frustrations are and we can work through it. Having Meet the Mayor meetings, which they're on pause right now, but I think I'll probably start them again in the next week or so. You know, just do them by Zoom and stuff where people can bring their ideas and I can talk to them. And if they have legs, we can kind of, you know, I can go to staff and say, look, is there a way that we can make this work, or is this sort of pie in the sky? And the thing I love about brainstorming and that kind of stuff is I don't get too concerned if the first idea doesn't make it, because sometimes you just sort of ping ideas off each other, and then you talk to staff who, you know, they're going to know, you know, the legislative limitations, and you know, you talk to, you know, politicians who've been around for a long time, and they'll say, hey, you know what, you might not want to talk about that because there's another election coming up at some point, and so, you know, through that system, you know, basically kind of moving things forward. So yeah. Now one thing, when I think I may have met you at a couple of conferences, but I had you come and speak to our water committee. I invited you years ago, yeah. And if I recall, you had just had a baby at that point. Can you tell me a little bit about that and how that's affected your life?
Yeah, so I have 2 children, and another on the way. So I have 2 daughters. One is 4. Her name is Esri, named after Star Trek, and Deep Space Nine specifically. And a younger daughter who just turned 2, and her name is Reyna, which is partially after Star Wars, but it's just a cool name. So we have another baby on the way, due at the end of July. So my wife is being a complete superhero right now, and I've not been able to really be as much as a parent as I like to be.
Mm.
And I blame Zoom, honestly. The fact that we can jump on and have meetings and get things done is good, but now I'm not physically away, and now I can hear the difficulties that happen sometimes, and I have nothing but appreciation and a whole lot of guilt on not being able to be there. But
Mm.
I do know that at some point in the near future, given the situation that we're in, there's this kind of movement of people kind of just realizing that things aren't going to be the same anymore, and that's not necessarily bad as long as we get over the hump, so to speak, or
Mm.
um, but that people's values in regards to how work gets done and what is expected of them will change, and it's not going back because people have seen how things can be, and I think that change is threatening for a lot of people, but at the same time presents more opportunities for people like me who are normally 45 minutes away from work and 45 minutes away from the kids and so on and so
Mm.
forth, that it's not so much like that anymore. But it does mean I'll be wearing a hoodie and a hat when I'm on my meetings. Like I think that's part of it too. My family life is something that is very important. I mean, that's kind of boilerplate stuff, but
Mm.
being a father, being a husband is something that I need to actively do now because my life has been set up to do work and to recuperate from doing work. And that's not sustainable once you have all these other things you really want to do, let alone the things you feel you have to. And hopefully
Mm.
those are similar. Um, but it does kind of underline how different things are and how the kind of territory we're in. Like this isn't like anything else. And I think part of the next or these past few weeks and the next few weeks is going to be getting a sense of what this new territory looks like. That we're going to be like this for several weeks, if not more, probably more.
Mm.
And how do we find that equilibrium point between working from home, walking yourself downstairs, but making sure that your wife, who also can work by telecommuting, can get her time in as well,
Mm.
and not being able to have childcare. Now, it's not the same for a lot of the politicians that I know. I'm like, like I'm among the youngest cohort with the youngest kids, and so when school starts or when they get into be like 10, 11, 12, it's apparently easier.
Mm.
I think the problems just change, just to be honest with you there. But um, it one thing that I think is different for me is that I don't sense my life changing all that much. But I think I chalk that up to my personality and the fact that I don't really require the kind of social interactions that I know a lot of my friends and colleagues do. I'm I'm an introvert, and while it's kind of bridging on believing in astrology, my Myers Briggs is INTP. I'm okay alone for like weeks at a time. Now that doesn't happen for me ever, but this is where I talk about how the memes I've been sharing have been, I'm an introvert. It's my time to shine now, and it's kind of that case. But I am seeing a lot of people being affected by it, and hopefully continuing to do the innovative things that I've seen. The having breakfast or coffee in people's driveways 6 feet away or more, or what was the other thing I've seen? People sitting in the back of their vans or hatchbacks parked in
Yeah.
big parking lots, just kind of around a fake campfire that doesn't exist, but
Mm.
does in your heart and your mind. And I think those are things that we're going to need because not everyone can really just exist on PC games and reading and Reddit alone, where
Yeah.
it seems like I can, but I'm not representative of the people. I'm not of the people. I'm for the
Yeah.
people. And I think that's the difference there. So
Yeah.
yeah. So
Yeah.
I yeah. I'm when I'm thinking about the situation with COVID-19, I find myself thinking about it in terms of how it affects me, then my family, then the people around me, and then like in those concentric circles. And is that the kind of same sense that you get? Like, how do you approach the whole situation? You're very much the problem solver, right? So I see you attacking it at different angles, and
Yeah.
it's kind of markedly different than how I think about it, I think.
Well, first of all, I think I am sort of a crisis management. My perception of fear, or the way I react to fear, which I think is one of the things that happens in a situation like this, is my brain just sort of starts to try to solve the puzzle, whatever that puzzle might be. I mean, when I told my friends that I'm going to South Africa in 1990, 1991, when apartheid was a big thing and there was a lot of things going on around the world, and I said, if I don't go there, maybe I'll go to China. That it had the Tiananmen Square. I sort of have that sort of compulsion to go straight for the flame, if using the moth and the flame kind of analogy. And I think even from a career perspective, if I look back, I'd never taken a computer course, but anytime there's a computer problem put in front of me, I'd be like, well, you should do this. And then somebody say, well, you can't do that. And then I'd be like, okay, give me like 10 minutes, with Alta Vista or whatever the search engine was back in the 90s. And I'd come back with the answer, and then people would mistakenly think that I knew what I was talking about. But again, I did theater for 10 years, so sounding like I know what I'm talking about that's kind of the whole gist of theater. And but when I worked at Shaw Cable, I got hired in marketing, and the first day I was there, they were launching internet, and there's all these problems, and I kept just suggesting these very simple solutions. I was playing video games at home, hosting LAN parties, and who knew that that troubleshooting came in very effectively, and folks that had taken a course and gotten a degree didn't necessarily have the skill set for trying to put out a fire when you're in the fire. It's a mindset that's kind of required. And I look back at that time, and I got the job, and I told my wife, who I've been together since high school, to be fair, and again, like you, I owe her so much. And she was actually my campaign manager when I ran for city council when I was 19. So she knows I'm a Wignut for sure. But I said, I got this job working for Shaw Cable. It's like a 9-to-5 job, nothing too exciting. And so I come home after my first day, and I'm like, yeah, they kind of promoted me to being in charge of the internet department. I don't know what it means, but they gave me a company car and a laptop and a cell phone and a credit card, and and I kept telling them, like, I don't want those things. That's not why I got hired. I'm happy to help the team, but I don't know why you want me to lead the team. And then they offered me fiber optic to my house, and that was it. I was like I could literally have my game servers there on fiber optic. I mean,
that's the best Counter-Strike server ever. I wish I knew you back then.
Well,
you look like a 1.6 kind of guy. So
well, and my ping times are quite low, so you might not want to have known me, because when I'm in the room with the server, there's certainly something that gets lost. But one of the challenges with that is, I was working usually 6 a.m. till 10 or 12 o'clock, midnight kind of thing. And so, you put in 16, 18-hour days, 7 days a week for basically 3 months. Yeah. And it was, she just didn't get to see me at all, and the thing that kind of allowed me, being of need is a big thing, like people asking me for help and me being somewhat helpful is good, kind of feeds my dopamine and stuff. But the other thing is that we'd actually booked to do the West Coast Trail So it was like, I was clear. I was like, you got me every day, all day for 3 months, and then I'm gone for 2 weeks. And my wife and I are going to be doing the West Coast Trail, and that's what we did. And we're able to reconnect and have just a phenomenal experience. And I remember when I reminded them about a week before, I said, okay, next week I'm taking off again. And they're like, well, you can't leave. And I said, well,
I am anyway, so deal with it.
I said, I'm going. And they said, well, then you have to take a cell phone. And I was like, do I tell them about the cell phone signal? No, I'll take the cell phone.
Yes, you just say yes and go. I mean, it's going to be, when was this? So it's at least another pound of weight, but
yeah. And so, off we went, and it was, again, a phenomenal time. And then when I got back, got into a less rigorous schedule. But I mean, the challenge that I'd run into is I'd be talking to somebody who installs all the ATMs, bank machines for TD and Canada Trust, actually most of the banks across Canada. And he's like, oh, I want to do this video. And I'm like, oh, I do video. I can do voiceovers. And so I do this stuff. And then he says, oh, TD and Canada Trust are merging. Do you think you could help them with that? And then, I'd end up on these weird tangential kind of contracts. And so although I was working full time at Shaw, I'd then take on these other contracts where I'd be doing all sorts of weird and wonderful things. And it kept me really, really busy. And after 2 years at Shaw, I actually said, okay, now I'm going to South Africa for about 3 months. And my wife and I were getting married, and that would be our honeymoon. And again, you can't leave for 3 months. And I said, look, you guys, I give you everything I got, but this is important, and when I moved to the Valley here about 17 years ago, I said, no more computers and no more politics. And neither have worked out very well. But when I started my computer company, that was the big thing, is that I'm only going to work 4 days a week. I'm not going to give up all my free time. And in fact, I use that fifth day, work day, as you might call it, as like my volunteer day. And so I help out various organizations in the Valley, whether it was the Comox Valley Youth Music Center or Rotary or whatever it was, and it wasn't every week, and it was great. And it meant that Michelle and I could, have a lot of long weekends together and stuff. But of course, I'd been teaching at the college, and when my last week of teaching, I said, I'm starting this company. It's going to take a couple months to get off the floor, and she says, oh, I'm pregnant. And of course, at that point, I was like, I can be a bit of a smart ass. I was like, oh, it's probably going to be twins, which it ended up being twins. And so we opened up the company basically in November, and in January, I think it was first week of February, she went to preterm labor. We flew to Vancouver to Children's Hospital. We were there for about a month. We came back. The kids ended up being born down in Victoria at their Victoria General Hospital, because they sort of weren't too sure if there's going to be issues. And there were, and we ended up 4 months down in Victoria with our kids. And of course, when we knew it was going to be a boy and a girl, obviously the first thing I said is, Luke and Leia. I mean, it's meant to be. How could you go wrong with that? And I got vetoed on that. To be fair, I don't think it was necessarily the worst decision Michelle's made. My second choice was Bart and Lisa. Also got vetoed, and we ended up with Megan and Connor, which I think that suits them really well. But yeah, I think things were pretty good, and I wasn't too busy, and even with getting onto city council again, it's tough, because if I see an issue, I kind of dig in and I want to do more. And when I was chair of the water committee, I was organizing trips down to Victoria to talk to ministers. And I got a minivan, so I'd invite everybody, any mayor, Comox First Nation chief, everybody. I'd be like, all right, let's go down there and let them know what we need. And but it was all scheduled up, and I think last year, as becoming mayor, I was pretty busy, and as chair of the regional district, that obviously was even busier. And I told everybody, I'd be stepping down from the regional district at the end of October, which I did. And then basically ended up with the flu for a bit, and then ended up getting knee surgery in January, and getting diagnosed as diabetic, and all that kind of stuff. And basically, just as I was coming out of the fog of those things, we ended up looking at this coronavirus, and so I had that conversation with my wife early on, that as a diabetic, that's going to put me at risk. As a kid, when I was 15, I had mycoplasma pneumonia, and both my lungs collapsed, and I wasn't supposed to survive. And at the end of the day, I did. Obviously, I'm still here. But those kinds of things, from a medical perspective, specifically with this, made me say, look, if I don't need to be out there, is there a way that I can get the things done that need to get done? And so I think, I have seen the same thing as you potentially. The last 2 weeks, Friday the 13th is basically when I went into lockdown. And so for the last 2 weeks, basically working in the bedroom, the only room in the house that locks, and, sitting there and on the phone, trying to keep up with emails, which actually I found haven't been too onerous.
They've been about the same for me too. That's interesting, eh? Like it's I think people are still trying to figure out what the new normal is going to be.
Yeah.
Like it's very much a and how people react to it. Like it sounds like you're kind of the kind of person who likes to when in a situation or faced with a problem or a challenge, you're diving in, you're trying to fix it right away, right? Like that sounds like
my staff would call me operational.
Yeah, I'm kind of different when it comes to that. And I think one thing I want to say before I even delve into that is that I think I agree with you with the whole idea that when you're political, you're kind of already kind of off, kind of weird, like I remember having this conversation with other local leaders and other politicians going like, so when did you realize you were a politician? Like, like realizing that you're just inherently weirder than everyone else because you're actually willing to undertake these things.
Yeah.
Because most of my family and friends, we have a passing interest in certain aspects of politics.
Yeah.
But the thing that I quite like is that being political isn't so much about being proactive or reactive or extroverted or introverted. It's this willingness to be a part of a public conversation, about what the problems are, how we should actually deal with them, and how you should stop other people from doing the things you don't want, and that's the real partisan part of politics, which is why I think I really like local politics, because you don't see too much in the way of partisanship. Sometimes you see some geography-based kind of wrangling and grumbling, and you do kind of get a sense of that person's more conservative, that person's more liberal, but it's not the same as a parliamentary or legislative kind of just fight all the time. And I like the idea that there's a core of local politicians who are, I can't remember what it is that Josie said, Josie Osborne. I think it's a pragmatic optimist or an optimistic pragmatist or something like that. It's one way or the other. But there's a difference. It's like bluish green is not greenish blue. But maybe I'm just being a bit too pedantic when it comes to that, which is part of the style as well. I do find that I see people who are very intent on trying to impose order on this uncertainty that's happening now. And I think that's something that needs to settle out. I mean, I know that a lot of people want to take control of a situation to feel safe. And I think I have to realize that I think, not inherently, but I think I've cultivated a greater sense of tolerance for uncertainty, whereas not a lot of leaders, especially, but people who are in this kind of government or problem solving aspect, they do not a lot of tolerance for uncertainty. It's we have to know, we have to do something about it, and we need to guarantee that it's going to be this way or that way. And for me, that way lies madness, because that's when you put the 70-hour week in, or that's when you stay up really late to 4 a.m. to finish that one thing that you have that will somehow impose order on the next week, and it never does. So it's for me, it's balancing and being smart. It's that 80-20 principle. What is it? Pareto principle.
Mm-hmm.
The idea that 20% of what you're doing is going to have 80% of the impact, and it's a different language for each situation, especially each community. What works in my situation may not work even in the neighboring local government, let alone that. But if we're going to stay human throughout this entire thing, we're going to have to identify where it really matters and where it's just looking busy, or where it's just satisfying our hearts or our guts, that we're doing enough to feel good about going to bed at night. And it's a different principle for everyone, but I find that you can't really yell at coronavirus and make it change, right? Like that's not changing because of the fact that you want that report by tomorrow morning. It's what's actually going to change is by communicating and making sure that we can continue in spite of all of the disruptions that are going on, and we just keep going at it and keep going. And I think that's the opportunity that's presented by the situation we're in, that we will hopefully not think of cubicle time as somehow more productive than being on your laptop in your car with a cell phone connection to your Bluetooth, doing the same thing. And I think the nice HR people out there might sit me down and have a conversation about that, but I am not bound by that. So I guess I'm free to have my own opinions there until I'm told they're wrong. It's I think we're turning a corner in regards to how work culture looks and what we may see moving into the future, now that people are aware of and have used Zoom and can see the fact that it's very useful to share a screen, because if you can give the screen to the person who knows how to use the program, it's suddenly so much better. You don't lose 20% of your time figuring out the technology or watching somebody click all the way to the file and then edit and then copy and then click all the way to edit and then paste and then realize they screwed up and have to do it again. Right? Like it's I mean, that's a small example, but part of what I'd like to see is that there's technology and there's stuff that have been created by Generation X that's been waiting for us to really use to its full advantage. And I don't think it's going to be me. I'm like a couple years after you, but I do see technology being used really well by people born in the late 80s and into the 90s. And I think all of that stuff is going to really help us move into the future from a work perspective. And it's just got to be that difference between UI and UX. User experience is different than user interface. And we just need to be smart about how different generations, different cultures are using technology. And I think the cultural aspect matters more. But now we're getting into that kind of business adaptation idea. And that's something that interests me from the perspective of having been a staff member in my nation, and then being a political person is markedly different. And often being the youngest person in the room of political leaders, First Nations wise, or local government wise, and realizing that there are things we just don't know the potential, let alone what's realistic in the next month or two in regards to our capacities for communication or information gathering. And once you do harness those things, you do see results. I mean, there's a reason Cambridge Analytica actually exists, right? Like the work that was being able to be done and gleaned is amazing, and it's scary at the same time. And I think that's the part that has to be tempered in how we approach technology and how we approach politics, because it's not predictable. And so, to a certain degree, I prefer paper ballots when it comes to votes, and I do prefer certain things because there's security features in older technology. It's like people who drive standard transmissions. Their cars are inherently more secure because car thieves will not pick that car if they can't drive standard. And so, like paper ballots are the political equivalent of driving standard at that point. And it's those kind of observations and those kinds of pieces of wisdom that we need to glean from that bright future that we may blunder into and create a lot more problems, but we still have to do it, right? Like that excites me. We could go into way more about that, but I don't think we should. That's a different kind of stream, I think.
Yeah. Well, and I think people often assume that because of my background, especially technically, and I kind of laugh. Like, I've never taken a computer course. It's never been something where it's like, okay, this is going to be my career or anything like that. And I was just chatting back and forth on the Facebook with one of my host fathers in South Africa who was a lawyer and teaches judge. He was actually an acting judge for some cases while I was there that I got to sit in on. And I remember one day he came home with this very expensive laptop and had an optical drive. And again, this is 1991 era. And he's like, "Can you make this thing work?" And I said, "I don't know anything about computers." And but I took it out of a box and I said, "I'll look at it. I like kind of looking at things." And there was a floppy disk and it said insert and type, install. And I was like, I think I got that. And off I went and just kept asking for more disks. And next thing you know, I think it was Windows 3.1 or something was on there. And again, it was more of like a chainsaw or a hammer. It was just a tool. What was really exciting is that the optical drive allowed him to have every single case in South African history on disk that you could search. And so one, it was getting the laptop up and running. And then it was like you click this thing in there and you start looking up based on keywords and stuff. Again, this is 4 years before I ever connected to the internet. And I didn't think anything of it. I just went, well, there you go. This is a tool for a lawyer. And I kind of beeled away, and that was that. I didn't really think of it at all after that, really. But then I kind of go back and I'm like, okay, well, all right. Well, when I was 5 years old, we had a VCR and it was blinking 12, and I went up and started pushing buttons until it had the right time on it, and we weren't supposed to touch it. That was only for the parents, but it was one of those things. Again, kind of going back to I think one of your comments. It's tough for me. I know if I go, this is the right thing to do, and in my mind, if I look back, even my grade 2 student evaluation that my wife found while we were spring cleaning over the last couple of weeks had a few insightful things. I like to fight. I fought all the time when I was in school. I was a scatterbrain, so had all sorts of things going on in my brain, and then I was good at math. And I think the math thing wasn't something I worked hard at. It's just one of those kind of intuitive things. And so when I see something, and if we look at our current situation, when they say flatten the curve, well, to me, I look at the math of it and it's like, okay, well, if we're going to flatten the curve, we got to start early. We got to encourage people as much as we can to stay home. And, I think, again, kind of looking like trying to make it something that we're doing together, try to inspire people or try to really encourage them to do it rather than say, if you don't do it, you're going to get fined. And that negativity that, and the shaming that can come from that, I don't think is necessarily as helpful or gets us to where we want to be. As I think I heard you say this a week or so ago, and when you were doing a stream, and I've plagiarized you, just so you know, and but you talked about staying human, and I think that's the thing that, at the end of all of this, we're gonna beat this thing. It's gonna be hard, and it's going to be harder for some people more than others, really, depending on where they are in their life. And we have people that are essential workers that had no idea they were essential workers until this happened. They're flipping burgers at McDonald's or something, and all of a sudden they're considered an essential worker. And again, appreciating, we have firefighters and paramedics in the military, the RCMP, that they're on the front line. They're this is what they've chosen to do, and I respect them immensely. But if we start shaming people, if we start being too angry, where does that leave us? 2 weeks, 2 months, 2 years from now, when we inevitably get through this, and then something else is going to come in and whack us on the top of the head and say, hey, humans, you think you got everything figured out. Well, maybe not so much. But if we're able to, keep human, keep those connections, I think that's the most critical thing. And one of the things I put in my calendar as best I can is trying to go out for bike rides with the kids, or even just calling friends that I haven't talked to in a long time. Or if there's friction between someone, call them up and say, look, what's the problem? How do we work through this? We gotta get stuff done right now. Let's not waste our energy on negativity, because we need all of that energy just to stay positive. I mean, these are early days. It's gonna probably get a little more stressful before it gets less stressful, I think. And either way, being human, being inspired by all the great things that people are doing right now. Like you said, having I don't know if you call them car dates, where you meet in the parking lot, but those kinds of things, and we're adapting as best we can, and really setting that tone. And again, one of the reasons why I really wanted to interview you is, when you've ever come, I've seen you speak in public a few times, and you're just articulate, you're intelligent, and maybe it's because you're not like again, I think I'm more that loud guy who, talks sometimes just for the sake of hearing himself. But I try to really listen to those around me, and I mean, huge kudos to just your ability to get people's attention and say what's important, and really get people moving in the right direction. And I really admire that about you. We're at an hour already. It's blown by really fast.
Yeah.
We sort of said maybe half an hour, 45 minutes, and here we are. I don't know. Do you have any final thoughts? Things you want to make sure?
I think just on the stay human aspect, and I'd like to get to a question that Qualicum Beach Councillor Scott Harrison has just sent us. So, hi Scott, it's good to hear from you. I do think, from my perspective, what I'm concerned about, and I think we've touched on this, is when I say stay human, I mean all of the things when it comes to interpersonal connections, because we need to find a way, especially as men, to have respectful candor between one another. A lot of the political difficulties that I've come up and being a part of often originates with that kind of not being clear about what your intention is by saying things in a certain way. And I see that magnified in conference calls or in political processes. And I think that's something that men will need to learn just by practicing more at communicating with one another, whether it be interpersonal or in, at the business of government. and the interactions between agencies and all of those things. But I think what I need to really wrap my head around and be able to communicate clearly is that, and I think this returns back to the whole idea that what a lot of people do in regards to a response to stress and challenging situations is to try to take control and make the environment suit what you require as a person. And so I see a lot of comments on Facebook about we need to shut it down now. We need to invoke the Emergency Act. We need to make sure it's going to happen because we need to guarantee it's going to happen. And I really get that feeling. I get it. My youngest daughter had pneumonia at 8 months. That makes me feel as if, and feel is the most important part, that she is more vulnerable. So of course I want to take every step available to ensure that she is safe. But this is where my feelings end up interacting and potentially combating the rights that are given to every person in Canada via the Charter. And I think this is where we need to have a better understanding from a civics perspective, but also have an understanding of why the government, whether it be the provincial or federal government, are doing what they're doing and why they're doing it the way we are, and why we're not allowing local states of government to exist, or local states of emergency here to exist. Because this is a pandemic. It's not restricted to one area. And I think what we need to do is ensure that the appropriate behavior is positively shown, but also put forward in as many ways as possible so that it sticks. It's getting the message to stick. It's doing all those things. So when I talk about stay human, I'm also talking to the people who are arguing for the most extreme measure right away, even though it does guarantee, or at least in people's minds, in their guts, guarantee results. It's more about realizing that, once again, you can't just yell at coronavirus, that certain rights of mobility do exist between citizens in Canada, and restricting those things has to be undertaken in a very serious way. That's part of it too, that it's very easy to sit in your armchair in your comfortable home and say, no, we should shut everything down. Oh, what if you can't do that? Or what if you can only do that for another day and a half and then you're homeless? What if you need to get out and go to work? Or what if you need to do these things to even make it to the next month? Or because that's when the help is coming in. Some are coming in May, let alone April. So we have to understand that we're going to have to accept some inherent risk because not everyone is in the same situation, and because we do not have the logistics set up financially or even politically to take care of people who are at their most vulnerable. And it's tough because, once again, we start talking about privilege, and that shuts people down really easily. And so yeah, that's a longer conversation, but I really do find that we have to accept a certain level of uncertainty, and for as many, and that's anathema for so many people. They're going to react viscerally to the fact that I said that. And I'm not saying we need to be weak in regards to our response to coronavirus, but what I am saying is that doing the immediate, what you think the most effective thing is going to be, needs to be thought of, because a mistake may have unintended consequences. And we need to get through these crises better than we have in the past, in regards to 9/11 and the financial collapse. And now this, I mean, every 10 years, it seems like it's something, and we always lose something as a result of it. So we need to take better action. But once again, I'll take another 15 minutes to talk about it. So I wouldn't mind. So Scott Harrison said, do you think that the current debate of what constitutes an essential service will shift in regards to conversations about inequality and our communal responsibility to others in the future? So I read out the question, so I'm going to make you answer it first.
Absolutely.
Okay.
I think, obviously, I've already talked a little bit about those essential services, and really, the respect that I have, and the knowledge that there are people who are an essential service right now that had no clue 3 weeks ago that they were an essential service. And more importantly, some of these organizations, businesses, jobs don't necessarily have a health and safety officer. They don't have, sometimes it's just a little corner store, or it's a small company that, it's hard for them to adapt so quickly. And to me, that's where I see the big issue. My company has got about 10 people in it. Maybe it's closer to 15. Shows you how much I pay attention. I got some really good staff. But on Friday the 13th, I said, look, I don't know how I can keep you guys safe. When people are bringing in their computers and their iPhones and tablets, literally the things that they're sneezing and eating on.
Nothing more disgusting than a keyboard or a mouse or a device at that point. That's
And so I said, when you guys tell me that you've got a protocol in place, it's going to keep you safe and keep the customer safe. That's where I feel like we can certainly start allowing those kinds of things. And, it reminds me, I've had just about every job you can imagine. And so I go back to when I was in high school, and I had this chunk of time between about 10 o'clock at night and 6 o'clock in the morning that I wasn't doing anything, and I didn't sleep much. So I went and got a job at McDonald's, or 7-Eleven, sorry. And 7-Eleven was open 24 hours a day. And so I got on the 11 p.m. to 7 a.m., I think was the shift. And I thought, I was working my butt off. I was doing this and that, but I was up anyway. So why don't I work? And so my first night there, I go in and they're training me, and they're like, here's how you use the credit card machine, and this, that, and the other thing. One of the things they said is, this is how you lock the front door, but you never lock the front door. We've never locked the front door ever. So don't worry about it. You're never going to need it. And then that was 11 o'clock or so. At 2 a.m. when the bars let out, a car came careening through the parking lot and went through one of the gas tanks, the pumps. And my car was parked. Actually, it was my mom's car that I borrowed for that night. Had less than 2,000 kilometers on it, and the gas pump went right into the back of the car. Gas spilling out, craziness, absolute craziness. And I looked to my coworker and I said, "I'll go out and I'll deal with this." Out I went, and got their license plate number. And the person said, like, do you want to fight or whatever? And I literally just said, I'm not getting paid to fight you. What are you talking about? I got your license plate number. Do whatever you want to do. And they had to lift their car off, and off they went. And I went back inside and said, I got the license plate number. And they said, that's great. And they were sort of processing customers buying milk and Slurpees and such. And I said, have you called the fire department? And they're like, well, we called 911, so they know what's going on. I said, oh, okay. So the fire department's on their way. Yeah, fire department's on their way. And I was like, okay, have you turned the pumps off? And they're like, oh, no. And I was like, and there's a big red button that says emergency off. So reach across, hit the emergency off. And I'm like, did you turn the electricity off outside? Because again, there's a special breaker to turn the power off. And no, we haven't done that. At this point, I leap over the counter because that was actually underneath, and I jumped underneath and I flicked off the breaker. And I'd worked in auto body where you're dealing with very highly flammable paints and other substances. And so you learn about WHMIS and all the hazardous materials and stuff. And it dawned on me, like, that just hadn't happened here. And that's my own personal experience. And I can see how that can really be happening throughout, our country right now, and making sure that people who are dealing with these very dangerous situations. And again, right now we're talking COVID-19, but making sure that they have the tools and the knowledge and the protocols in place, because that's what's going to save them. That's what's going to keep them healthy. And that's what I'm concerned about. I mean, I do have people contact me already if they see a business that they don't think is necessarily adhering to social distancing or physical distancing, and having those protocols in place. I have no issues. Let me know. I'll contact that owner right away, and have that conversation to get them to compliance, not to yell and berate them and really get them into a reactionary, but really to say, we got to do this together. This is something that we have to do as a community. That's how we're going to make it through. You don't want to be known as the company that did the bad thing, and it goes out on social media or whatever. And I don't want that either, right? I mean, that's not going to build a better community. And so, I mean, when we talk about, that essential service and the inequality is one of those. I mean, that's its own conversation in and of itself, I could probably talk hours about that. I mentioned, going to South Africa because of apartheid.
Yeah.
I've had the honor of living on reserve up in Fort St. James, and I grew up on tugboats up in Prince Rupert and going up and down the coast of BC, and being able to look at communities that most people don't get to see. And there's love, and there's a sense of community, but there's also things that have been done in parts of Canada to people that's just not acceptable, and that causes stress, that causes anxiety, and right now we got to look after ourselves. We got to look after our mental and physical health. Right now, this is where you're going to see people using substances. I mean, just if you look at the BC liquor stats, liquor sales are up like 40% or something, and how that's going to affect the community going forward. That's what I'm concerned about, making sure that people feel calm, that they don't feel like they have to turn to substances, or that anger and frustration they have, especially now that we're in our little silos in our homes, that doesn't get taken out on their loved ones, their children, because, I mean, again, we have immense pressure happening right now, and it's really about how do we rise to the occasion? How do we make sure people stay calm? And in your words, how do we make people stay human? Because that's the opportunity I see in front of us right now.
Mm-hmm. I'm in agreement with a lot of what you're saying, especially when it comes to kind of making sure we have an understanding of just how our society is built. I mean, one of the first things I gleaned from my relationship, or my coming on to local government and just being an observer for the first few months and then fully joining, is that some of the most important aspects of Western civilization are not curated at the federal or provincial level. That when it comes to liquid waste, clean water, solid waste, all of these mega important things,
mm-hmm.
the responsibility falls to the local government for the maintaining of those things. Mm-hmm. So I am often witnessing folks who are calling down the fact that, oh, my property taxes have gone up this much, and what are they doing? And really, coming from a First Nation who has been in an okay situation, but knowing stories of just what's happened in my community, which has been generally okay, not god awful like some Northern Ontario situations. When those things are gone, society isn't what you think it is. There is real uncertainty in terms of Maslow's hierarchy of needs for survival, let alone all these other things people are worried about. And so coming at it from a First Nations perspective, or at least one who is aware of the situations that northern communities and very remote First Nations have to deal with on a day-to-day basis, and realizing that the cost of that is property taxes and paying them now in the place that I live, it's night and day. Of course you would choose to do that. You can, and that's one of the roots of inequality, is that kind of basic level of service should be maintained. and guaranteed for the future, right?
Mhm.
That how often have we leveraged our existing infrastructure, and we're going to make our children or grandchildren pay for it and overpay for it just because someone wants their tax take to be lower, or for a politician to say that I didn't increase taxes.
Mm.
That's why I really think asset management practices where we actually take information down about what is the life of a piece of infrastructure as vital as water or sewer, and how much will it cost on a month or a year-to-year basis, and you see the numbers, how that's going to go up over time, and when you make
Yeah.
that decision to replace, and how are you going to pay for that point? Like, okay, it's 13 years in the future. Okay, what does your rate have to be in order to get there? Well,
Yeah.
it's usually up, and people really don't
Mhm.
like that. Now, the same thing can occur, and this kind of follows with Scott's question in regards to essential services. One thing that I've noted is that people are starting to really, really appreciate grocery store workers again. And I would posit that they're on one side of the supply chain. So one thing that Western economic capitalism does well is supply chain,
Mm.
right? That's what we're really good at. I mean, this is the advent of just-in-time delivery and making sure your supply chains are completely and utterly uninterrupted. And that's why
Mm.
people wig out when you can't send things by sea or when rails are blockaded,
Mm.
because everything is just in time for the most part. And the difference is you don't have warehouses full of stuff that you can just pull into a grocery store or a hardware store. Everything's delivered just in time. And Western civilization, for the most part, the global economy is set up in a just-in-time situation. And there may be a return to some more warehousing and putting production in place that is in the locality.
Mm.
And the same thing holds true for how we approach land and productivity and all that sort of thing. But for
Mhm.
me, it's the people on those supply chains that matter so much. And part of the difficulty is that in order to have that inequality addressed in a real way, I see two routes. I see either some sort of instead of a network of contractors who are not able to, organize in a way that will actually produce value for them in the way that they require. Something needs to change in that arrangement, because if each individual contractor on the supply line decided, no, I'm going to increase all my rates 20%, and if everyone did it, then that's fine. But that's not going to happen because of the way that the economy is set up. So solidarity is probably not going to be a real or a realistic solution in the next little while, where it's not a generation with a culture that's open to solidarity. It'll see it
Mhm.
as a threat. It'll be portrayed in the media as a threat.
Yeah.
And so I think the only other alternative is some form of universal basic income, that the people who we depend on now, the pharmacy workers, the grocery workers, the truck drivers, the farmers, all of these people who are doing immensely important stuff are barely getting by. Like the guy who owns his own truck and is transporting, food in a refrigerator truck. I don't see that guy making money hand over fist. I see him as making a reasonable living based on what he does, but he's always going to worry. And the same thing holds true for farmers, often of which you have a farm, but then one of you goes up north to work in Kitimat or the oil patch because you can't make ends meet.
Mm.
And what will address that partially is some form of universal basic income, because that work needs to be valued higher, right?
Mhm.
And outside of the ability to negotiate higher rates, using solidarity as a way to force the people with the money to actually agree to it,
Mhm.
it's either nationalizing certain aspects of the economy, which is just as scary for a lot of people, or introducing some sort of relief for the people who are valuable, who cannot be organized in the same way just because of the way our system is set up. And then they're in place and in a more secure location so that when the time comes that we do need grocery store workers to go to work every day and actually be able to live off of that, that's part of it. And it's right now, it's the only thing I can think of other than corporations and business owners all agreeing that no, we'll pay everyone more and we're going to raise our prices or reduce our total dividend or value stake and give them some of the value. But the thing is, we're not Germany. We don't have workers as a part of corporate boards, right? So there's got to be a solution where we're not depending on tips, right? I could go into that too, but like how value is thought of has been for the last 100 years. Things are worth what people will pay for them, and that's restricted by government going, but you can't gouge, right? On the supply side, but also on the labor side, you can't gouge.
Yeah.
That's not good enough anymore because things move and change too quickly. There needs to be some sort of mechanism that's put in place to allow for some buffer space when things get tough, because change happens so often. And the way that we live is still based on somehow assuming that you're going to be a salary man with the same employer for 25, 40 years. And that's only true in Japan, and only because of cultural reasons. Like things change, and that upheaval cost occurs for a person every time something changes, every time you have a kid, every time you have to move because your landlord's rent evicting you, or they have to sell because their mom died and they suddenly own this house and they don't want to, right? Every time your employer shuts down because they were a startup and they ran out of money, every time the market changes and suddenly oil's worth $45 a barrel instead of 90 or $20 a barrel like it is now.
Yeah.
What are the buffers that are created? And this is from an economic standpoint, things that like John Maynard Keynes has been talking about for almost 100 years now. And we're still trying to like teach ourselves these things. And so what are the more people-based mechanisms? Because we're very good from a top-down perspective. We can bail out companies so that they don't go down. Boeing's going to be fine, but is the Boeing worker going to be fine, right? And I don't think that's going to be the case. Whereas if we were to have universal basic income or something that helps workers, there's still money out there for companies to win, right? There's still the ability of companies existing today, existing if they don't get the money, but the people do. All you have to do is what's expected of you. Compete on the market and get people to purchase your services or your goods.
Yeah.
And once again, I could rant about this forever. But I think what I need to do is schedule a coffee across the parking lot with Scott and you and something. Talk about this, because if you get me riled up, I may start swearing at a certain point. But it's something where what we need to do is find a way to protect people from things like COVID-19. And what we're doing now in Canada is amazing. And I don't know if it's enough. For the arrangements that people have lived their lives paycheck to paycheck and have promised to pay for debts that they've incurred for good reasons or bad, wise or unwise. This is the situation we're in. And so how does that fall out? Are people going to be whole partway through this? Not everyone. Probably not even most everyone. Someone's going to have to pay for this. And I'm worried that it's the paying for it isn't going to be in market value. It's going to be in the coffers of people, regular people. And that's what concerns me, is that we have to realize that this may be the first pandemic we deal with in our lifetime. There may be 3 or 4 more. There probably will be, given how quickly and lucky we were in responding to SARS and Ebola and all these other almost pandemics that happened. This is something we have to plan for, and it's not just war. It's not just climate change. It's also this, and
Mhm.
it's also economic shenanigans. And I think the only constant is going to be an increasing frequency in the change over time. And what are we going to do as political leaders to allow for people to weather those upheavals when they occur? And I have to return to John Maynard Keynes in that when things are bad, you spend. When things are good, you tax. And you always keep an amount of money in the back somewhere, whether it be credit or actual funds, for those rainy days. And the problem with how things work now around my table, let alone the big tables federally, is that no one will deign to create a capital reserve because you're wasting taxpayer money, right?
Yeah.
But that's not how rainy day funds work. And so it's either frustrating or I don't understand enough. And I'm open to learning more about how things should be from various perspectives. It's just, from what I understand, which is admittedly not as much as I could, given everything else I do in my life, all of the computer garbage that I've learned the same way as you, is there and probably won't be replaced. But we can find a solution and work together on it. And hopefully there's an understanding of how things will change. And the frequency of that change will only increase. And how do we weather it, right? It's, I don't know. But that's part of the challenge and the excitement of it, I think.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think, again, we could probably have a whole another hour and a half on that topic alone.
Yeah.
My best friend in high school, I mean, he was pretty frustrated with the capitalist system, but we were just talking on the weekend, now that he's starting a business, sort of that full circle of like, okay, well, there's just that. I mean, to me, there's that simple math side of stuff, where it just costs a certain amount. And I think, I did my first budget when I was 12. And when I was 10, I started babysitting and making money. When I was 12, there was a 57 Chev pickup sitting in Prince George. I was in Salmon Arm, and I had a cousin that said he'd drive it, put it on a flat deck and drive it down, and then I could start restoring it, but it would cost $300. And so I went and I got a job to make $300 and making, I think $3 an hour, maybe a little less. Did the math. This is how many hours I got to work to make $300. And then, got my first paycheck and went, well, that's not nearly as much money as I thought I was going to get, and having that feeling of where's this money go, right? And then, made enough money. And then when I got the truck, then, well, now I needed more money to actually buy the stuff to restore it and get it functioning and stuff. And, and that kind of sort of got me on to, probably to be fair, a workaholic kind of thing. By the time I was 15, I was drywalling. I was making $25 an hour, which in 1989 was pretty tolerable money. Building chalets in Whistler or whatever it was that I was doing. And then when I stopped doing that, because I found it too dusty for my lungs, because I had been in that coma and the lungs had collapsed, then I got into auto body. Also a very dusty, sandy kind of environment.
Hopefully you got the masks, though.
Yeah. Actually, I have to say, I lucked out in the auto body side of things, that we did have actual masks that actually had vacuums on them, and I think it was actually a blower, and it would blow the air out to make sure that you weren't inhaling any of that toxic dust.
Positive pressure, so it always out.
Yeah. And which has nothing to do with me working all the time, but the thing for me is I didn't ever want to feel like if I wanted to do something that I wouldn't be able to. And again, I wanted to go to South Africa as a 17-year-old. literally the furthest place you can go to in the world from BC. Kind of one of the most expensive places you can go. I mean, Antarctica would probably be more expensive, but you know, and I've sort of looked at it, you know, okay, this is the mathematical, like I want this amount of money, work this amount, and then somewhere in the middle, we'll meet up. And you know, the first tech company that I owned was Silicon Garden, which may sound a little hippie-ish. It was a computer co-op, so everybody was an owner, and it was great. You know, we sat around on beanbags talking about how great it was going to be. And then when we started, it was so clear that the expectations that everybody had of each other were not articulated in any way, shape, or form. We hugged each other, we were nice, but you know, the people who were older, they're like, okay, you work 9 to 5, that's what you do. I was designing websites. I was like, my most creative time is between 10 p.m. and 2 a.m. And then I play video games. So there's no way I'm coming into work at 9 o'clock because I'd be sleepwalking. And it was heartbreaking to see how that didn't end up the way I wanted. The company continued and did well. But when I started the company I have now, you know, I was like, okay, let's have that single vision. And I'll certainly give the opportunity to staff if they want to buy in, they have that. But here are the tenets that we live by. You know, it's customer service. It's making sure that our culture internally is good. And you know, and if we get extra money, it's like, okay, guys, what are we going to do with this money? We can go go-karting. We can go high ropes. You know, we've done all sorts of things. And the thing that we do the most, honestly, is we rent the theater every time a Star Wars movie comes out. And it's this great communal thing where we all come together. And it's not me making the decision. It's everybody making that decision. And then staff saying, we want to take this opportunity and make it a fundraiser. So we'll do fundraising for the food bank or some other organization so that not only we're enjoying Star Wars and not only do we get to bring our family there and sort of break bread in a Star Wars-y kind of way, but then at the end of it, you know, we get to go drop off those hampers and the cash to the food bank and know that we've actually done something good. And so I think, you know, one of the things that I've sort of seen over the last couple of decades is that social entrepreneurship, right? And even now I think even within the municipalities, seeing how we can sort of have that social impact through the contracts that we do. And so, again, I mean, these are not quick, decisive things that are going to happen overnight, but there's certainly things that I think have us moving in the right direction. And I think for myself, I always feel, you know, yeah, there's the paycheck and all that kind of stuff. And I worked my butt off as a kid. So it's not that as important to me as it might be to my staff or other people in the community. So it's making sure that we're being as clear as we can that that we're going to be looking after each other as best we can. And locally, we don't have a ton of power. You know, I mean, when the premier or the prime minister says this is how we're going to keep people from being evicted during this time, for me, that's great. Like, that's something that I can echo and say, you don't have to worry about this now. When the prime minister says we're going to put $2,000 in your bank account every month, so you don't have to worry about food and those basic needs to get things going. That's, you know, again, I look right now that there is a sort of alignment. I think, you know, we're going to make it through. And at the end of it, you know, again, if we, using your words, you know, if we stay human, that puts us in a really good spot, you know, and because we're going to adapt, we're going to make it through, and hopefully we're going to be stronger, and not just in that sense of like, you know, we make more money or our companies are more fiscally responsible or those kinds of things, but we're stronger as communities, we're stronger as people, and that to me is sort of the focus that I'm trying to make sure people are looking at, because it's going to be stressful. But I think, as Canadians in particular, people have a very warm and inviting way to try to make sure they're looking after their neighbors.
Yeah, I think that's a great place to end up on, like making sure that we as individuals do what we can to really be aware of, the uncertainty on the future is, I think, something everyone should learn, and the value of hard work and that sort of thing. I think the one thing that I'd like to leave off on, though, is that as some form of political leader, we have more opportunity to create different sort of responsibility moving into the future, at least from a collective standpoint. And that's where I think those conversations need to be had, because there's what we know and what we don't know. And then there are a bunch of solutions that also create more uncertainty for a lot of folks. And I think we need to start with what we're trying to do, right? I think a lot of change is inherently scary for people, but if you start off by saying, this is something that Jesse Hempel would probably say, is if you start with the values and the approach and understanding in a common sense what you're trying to do and what you're not trying to do, then that'll create more candor, and that'll create people thinking about what solutions and how things can work rather than how they can't. And that's where I'm hoping we end up, that this example of people being able to be more focused on the home life, but also cognizant of work, can provide us the impetus to really look at, well, okay, how do we actually want our society to look? How do we want the economy to operate? And what are the more important things if we change that, right? Like, if we talk about things that I think are essential in terms of services, I talked about supply chains, but I didn't talk about internet, right? That's for me. There's Maslow's hierarchy of needs, and then there's the internet, and then there's everything else. And so when you said you were there for Shaw, I was there the moment cable was in on Shaw, because this is who I am. I'm an internet guy, right? Like, and that's part of it for me. Certain things will be valued much more highly. I would love to be a shareholder in Zoom right now, right? Like, it's the only word I've been hearing for the past 3 weeks in regards to that. I mean, and we use Microsoft Teams at Huit because we're all big into Microsoft Office, but oh man, imagine being in on the IPO of Zoom, and now this, like I'm not saying the market has no place for what it is we're doing. What I'm saying is that part of the way that we value things hasn't been conscious, it's been accepted. You need to value things in this way, and COVID-19 can create a situation where, well, wait a minute, is that true anymore? Do you really need to have a car that runs on gas? Maybe not, and that's what's scary, because people and tastes will change over time, but that's the inherent value of capitalism and the market, is that change can be an opportunity as well. And so how do we shift that conversation from change is bad into change can be good, because it may insulate us from future threats like this in the future. And that's the building I want to be a part of, and I think it's going to be part exciting, but as ever, as anything that has to do with government, it's going to be a whole lot of really, really boring, but really, really exciting, like, end goals. And so that's why I keep getting up. That's why I keep pushing, but only where I think I get 80% of the value, principle kind of thing. But it's making sure we stay positive and understand that we're going to get through this, and how things look after this is going to be different, but that's not necessarily bad all the way, right? And so how do we minimize the damage to people's lives and families, and how do we help build a more sustainable future from a social perspective, not just an environmental or economic one? I think that's part of the lesson I'm trying to glean from this whole thing is that sustainability is so multifaceted, and how we get through this next couple of months and stay sane and stay safe and stay human is going to be, for me, one where we have to take into account how everything is interconnected. How in Nuu-chah-nulth culture, there's a term, Hishuk Masawak, everything is one, everything is connected. That kind of interconnected and interdependent relationship between things that you don't think are initially related, well, it turns out they are. And it's all of that aggregate information, and we never understand all of it, but we need to appreciate the impacts that they have, and we're getting there, and that's exciting for me. That the wisdom of the elders is up there, right? Learned through trial and error, and understanding that a bit of your feet on the ground and understanding you may not know as much as you think you do, but also with the fact that it's being backed up by people who are trying to know as much as they think they do. And so that's exciting for me. And part of it is making sure that people understand that we'll come out of this if we do the right things. If we stay home, if we take it easy on all of these expectations that we had. The COVID-19 is that situation where you suddenly know that nothing's going to be the same anymore. And I remember sharing something from one of the a YouTube personality. He was asking, is there a name for that whole idea that at a certain point that nothing's going to be the same after this point? And I can't remember what the answer was, but it just understanding that and being able to wrap your head around that uncertainty, but also like you inherently do, it seems, working on the solution and moving ahead into the future. That's what's inspiring to me, that people who are so different can work on the same goals in wildly different ways, but be inherently complementary. And yeah, I could go on, but I'd just like to thank you for being on this, like inviting me, because it's good. So, but I hear my kids. They're fighting.
Absolutely.
They're fighting bedtime, and
we are so close. Yeah, I think we're almost at 2 hours. And I don't want this. Obviously, we can go on and on. I have to thank you so much for jumping in on this. I do have a favor to ask, though. As soon as you're done, I need you to go. I need you to hug your daughters. I need you to hug your wife and your baby to be, and thank them on behalf of me for taking you for a couple hours tonight, because it wasn't just this. It was time earlier, getting all the techno gods loving us as much as possible. So again, I think the really big thing is, we want people to stay calm, we want them to stay home, and we want them to stay human. And with that, I'm going to say good night, John. Thank you again, and we'll talk soon.
Have a good one.